Hello everybody, and welcome to this, my video manual on the Halina 35X right there. Also, this camera was called the Micronta 35X and the Sunscope 35X. So if you have a camera that looks like this, it has the 35X designation, it's probably this. So this is one of the most panned cameras in camera history in terms of quality, image quality. And here are some sample photos that you can use to judge whether or not that reputation is earned. The Halina 35X is a 35mm viewfinder camera. It has no light meter, a leaf shutter, with shutter speeds of 1/200th on the fast end to 1/25th of a second on the slow, and bulb. The flash sync on this camera is any speed, and that's with a modern flash you could just buy today and plug into it. And like I said, it is widely considered one of the worst cameras ever made. I will tell you right now that there are plenty of cameras I've used that are worse than this one. I think this is considered the worst because it is unarguably well made in terms of the housing and the feel. It's very solid and very, very heavy. The build quality is good. The interface on it, however, is overly complex and completely illogical, and to that end, it does have the worst camera interface of any camera I've used. And it feels as though it was designed for the manufacturer's ease of construction rather than the user's ease of use. So that's probably another reason why it's got such a mixed reputation. Well, by mixed I mean almost universally terrible. The target market on the Halina 35X, it was likely targeted toward higher-end viewfinder users. Now, I base that theory on the design and the build quality. Like I said, the build quality is good. It's metal. It's pretty. It is very heavy. It's metal throughout. If you look at the design, it has a red dot logo, which maybe looks like the logo of another high-end rangefinder making company. Lots of chrome. Very nice black leather or finish, black paint in a few places, and also just the machining quality on it is very good. So it is designed to look like much higher end cameras, like I said, right down to the red circle logo, and though it was actually based in the design of this was based on the Japanese Ranger 35 camera, it does bear some similarities to other high-end 35mm 1960s rangefinders. So the chrome finish on this is designed to look really good, but I will tell you right now, it is a pain in bright sun because that is a very, very reflective finish. And when I used this camera in full sun, it just shined sunlight right into my eyes frequently. That was annoying. And also the chrome finishing on it, quite honestly, isn't the best chrome work, and you can see in some places on mine where the chrome work has started to fail. And this has been in a case. Like I still have the case for it. It's just off camera. But even with as well as this camera has been cared for, the finish is kind of failing. The Haking lens, this is made by the Haking camera company. The lens lubricant, oh goodness, used by Haking. Oh. In almost all of these today, unless it's been taken apart and fixed, that lubricant is very, very stiff. After a few turns, it gets a little bit easier to use as the friction heats it up and causes it to get thin. And on hot days, it's okay to use. But the lubricant on these cameras has gotten very thick with time, and it is really hard to turn the focus and aperture mechanisms on these. Like, all right, so I'm going to show you something that almost never happens with a camera. I just focused it to closest focus. I'm going to turn the aperture, and it is so stiff that the aperture ring is focusing the camera. So that's not the way that's supposed to work. These were made by Haking in Hong Kong from 1959 until about 1962. That was the best date I could get. I couldn't find an exact time when it exited production. But in 1962, the Super 35X was released. Now, as we do, let's go over some of the camera's features. We'll start here on the top. You'll notice right off the top there are no strap lugs on this. That's because it was designed to be used with a case. On this side we have the film rewind knob right here. We have the model number, Halina 35X. A flash cold shoe. There is no flash hot shoe contact in here, so you cannot power a flash directly in here. But you can put, say, a rangefinder in here and get distance measurements. Here we have the shutter release button. Here we have the film rewind button. Here we have the film advance knob and your frame counter and your frame count index. On the front of the camera, we have the Haking Camera Company logo, the rangefinder, or the lens right here, which we'll take a look at in depth later in this video, and then the viewfinder window. This is not a rangefinder camera. This is a viewfinder camera, so you don't have any way to tell where your lens is focused through the viewfinder. You just see the scene. Back of the camera doesn't have a whole lot, just the viewfinder window right there. Here on the bottom of the camera, we have your tripod socket offset to the side. We have your film back lock and unlock switch right here, and then made in Hong Kong. While we're on the bottom of the camera, to open the camera, you just turn this so that the O is covered. When L is covered like this, the camera is locked. When O is covered, it is unlocked. And then you just remove the back of the camera. Inside of the camera, we have the film cassette chamber. This is where the film is loaded, and we'll see that in just a moment. We have these 4 film guide rails, and these guide rails keep the film flat and properly aligned as it moves through the camera. We have the film tension sprocket. As you advance the film, this spins right here to keep the film moving through the camera. And when you go to rewind the film, when you push the rewind button down, that allows us to spin freely. But if you don't hold the rewind button down, as we see in just a moment when we unload the film, you can't rewind it. We have the film take-up spool right here. On the back of the camera, we have the film pressure plate right here, which is what helps to keep the film sandwiched up against the shutter window. And then we have the locking and unlocking mechanism right here. All right, while we have the camera back open, let's go ahead and load some film and see how film works in this camera. This camera will use, this camera can use any 35mm film. However, because of the maximum shutter speed of 1/200th of a second, I strongly recommend not shooting anything faster than 100 ISO. And that's because if you shoot 200 ISO and you're out on a sunny day, you're limited to f/16. If you are using 3200 ISO, you're limited to shooting indoors. So if you're using 25 ISO or 20 ISO, then you can get away with a whole lot more and shoot at wider apertures. These cameras really were designed for slower films. So we're going to put the film cassette into the cassette chamber and pull out a leader. Now we'll know that this is lined up properly if the film is aligned here correctly, and now it is. This is what it's supposed to look like. If your film isn't lining up correctly, try adjusting the cassette here. And if that doesn't work, try adjusting the film rewind knob until your film looks like this. You want to have it resting between the outer film guide rails with the 2 inner guide rails right here underneath the sprocket holes like that. Okay? Now, you can see those sprocket holes line up with the film tension sprockets gearing. We're going to take the front of the leader and we're just going to slide it in over on the other side. I tried sliding it in on the wrong side at first. So we're going to slide it in on the other side just like that. Advance a little bit, hit the shutter button as needed to keep advancing. And this is what you want it to look like when it's loaded correctly. Now we're going to take the back of the camera. We're just going to slide it right on like this, lock it, and what we need to do now is take a look at this is a manual reset frame counter. So let's take a look right now. It's at 14. Let's find out if it counts up to 15 or down to 13. I don't remember. Counts up to 15. So what we're going to do is we're going to advance 2 frames. Now that we've advanced 2 frames, we're going to reset this. I'm sorry, it is counting down. So what we need to do is know how many frames were on the film we just loaded. If it was a 36 count roll, we're going to advance this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to 36 because this counts down. If it was 24, we just align that index to the 24. And that way, when we go about taking photos, it's going to count down for us. You can see the numbers on here descending as I advance the film. Now you know that your film is being taken up if this knob here spins in the opposite direction of the arrow. And that's because there's a mechanical linkage from the take-up spool using the film to the cassette, which is connected to this rewind knob. So also, after you load your film, what you want to do is just kind of tighten this in the direction of the arrow to take up any slack. There was no slack in the spool that I just loaded, so there's nothing for me to do. But that's a good way to make sure that your film stays as flat as possible. Anything you can do to help set this camera up for success will help it. Now, one thing to bear in mind about film is that it is one and done. So it can record an image one time, or it can record light, let's put it that way, one time, in a controlled manner with a proper exposure and shutter speed, aperture and shutter speed to create a proper exposure, or in an uncontrolled manner where it will absorb all the photons that reach it, like this. So in real life, if you were to take your camera back off of your camera, everything that has exited the film cassette would be erased. Every past and future photo would be erased from this film. And that's because once light reaches the film, it reaches what's called density maximum, cannot record any more photons. So this film right here, it's fine that it's ruined, it expired years ago, who cares? But at any rate, when you're using film, you want to advance your film the whole way, then rewind it the whole way before you open the film back. But I want you to see what's going on inside the camera because that's important too. So when you take a photo, take your photo, and now you advance your film, and you can see that it's pulled out of the cassette into the area of the shutter box and then pulled up onto the take-up spool. Just like that. Now, when you're done, you've taken all of your photos, you hold the rewind button down right here, and now we're going to rewind the film. And what you want to do then is rewind it all the way into the cassette like that. And that will help you ensure that you don't accidentally reuse this cassette and take double exposures that you didn't intend to take. Now that you're done, you can take that cassette out, grab another cassette and load it, or if you're done shooting for the day, don't load another cassette and just put the back of the camera back on. Make sure that you trigger the shutter before you put it away for the night, and you are done. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is how to use a flash with this camera. We're going to talk about both process and technique. So this camera has a flash PC port right here. I don't have a cable, unfortunately, but this will take any standard cable that you can just get today. So any flash you use must have the ability to take a cable to plug into the PC port here on the underside of the lens. Now, you can mount a flash right here on top of the camera if you would like. This is, empirically, the worst possible place to put a flash, however. The reason that this is the worst possible place is that when the light from your flash exits your flash, it reaches your subjects, bounces back towards the lens, and because that light is so flat, it makes your subjects look flat and waxy, which isn't a flattering look for anyone. So, because you have to connect this with a cable anyway, you can put this flash anywhere. You can hand hold it, you can put it on a little flash bar that connects it to the bottom of the camera. Over here is better, angled to the side is even better, tilted up at the ceiling to bounce off the ceiling is the best, especially if you can bounce it up at a 45-degree angle like this, up towards the ceiling or the wall and then back down. The reason for that is because whenever we see something, whether we're outside underneath the sun, inside underneath lights, outside at night underneath street lights, wherever we are, things are lit from above. So our brains are programmed to think of lighting from above as natural and correct. So if you replicate that with your camera, you'll get results that more people find more pleasing. So to use a flash, any shutter speed works. Just make sure you can plug it into the PC port and take advantage of it being off camera to angle the light from the flash however you'd like to get the best results. Any of the shutter speeds will properly sync the flash with this camera. So here we're seeing the lens on the Halina 35X. Now let's go over what everything is. This ring right here is your shutter speed selection ring. And so when the 200 is aligned with that diamond, that means you're set to 200, 1/200th of a second. So whatever speed you select and align with that diamond is your shutter speed. The diamond is also your focus point, which means that whatever is aligned with that diamond on the focus ring is what's going to be in precise focus. So as we adjust the focus, you can see the different numbers passing in front of the diamond. That's what is in focus, okay? And at least with this one, it's in feet. If you are in a different market, such as Asia or Europe, yours could be in meters. I'm not sure if they had different markings for different markets. Okay. Then up here on the front, we have the aperture ring. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it here, and you can see that little black dot. That is your index. And then there are some numbers here from 3.5 up to 16. This is your index marking going across the aperture range. And I am really trying to hold this lens still, but the lubricating oils are so thick. And yes, I did try to fix that, but could not. Okay, so anyway, so to adjust your aperture, you just adjust this ring, and that dot will tell you what the aperture setting is. All right. Now, the next thing that we're going to look at is these numbers here. Between the shutter speed dial and your focus numbers, there's a scale that goes from 16 to 16. That is your zone focusing scale or hyperfocal distance scale, depending on how you use it. So the numbers 16 to 16, 8, 4, with dots for 11, 5, 6, and 3, 5, correspond exactly with your aperture numbers right here. So let's say that you have set your aperture to f16. Okay, what this is telling you, and let's say you're focused right now at infinity. This is telling you that everything from infinity down to, we'll call that about 14 feet, will be in focus. Now, if you adjust your infinity mark over here to this 16, what this now tells you is everything from infinity down to 6 feet will be in focus. And these numbers correspond with your aperture. So if you set your aperture to a set number, that way you can compare it to what your focus is to figure out what's going to be in focus. So let's do a couple other examples. Let's set our aperture to f8. And let's say that we have a subject who is exactly 10 feet away from us, okay? And so we're going to take a picture of that subject, whatever it is. With f8, we know everything from 10 feet down to about, we'll call that 7, is going to be, 20 feet down to 7 is going to be in focus, with 10 feet being the prime focus because we're at f8. Okay, well, we just took a meter reading. f8's not enough light, so we're going to have to set it to f4. Okay, we need 2 more stops of light, but our subject is still 10 feet away. Well, if we use those 4s right there, then we know everything from about 9 3/4 to about 11 feet, maybe 12, is going to be in focus. So to use these numbers, you just have to figure out what aperture you're set at, what your focus distance is, and then go outward from your focus point to those aperture numbers, and that's what's going to be in focus. So if you're focused close like this is zone focusing. If you're focused at f16 and have infinity lined up here, and it goes down to 6 feet, that's hyperfocal distance. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do now, understanding what the lens is telling us, is talk about how to take a photo. So the process, the way that this camera works is, like I said, it feels like it was designed for construction ease, not for user ease. Because if you just push the shutter button like that, you haven't taken a photo. You can go through an entire roll of film doing this and have it come back completely blank because the shutter has never actually fired. So before you take a photo, what you need to do is get your settings correct. So we take our meter reading, and we need 1/50th of a second at f5.6. And now we're going to dial in our focus point. Okay. now you have to arm your shutter, which is this lever right here, and then you can take a photo. And then you can advance it. And again, if you just do this, you haven't taken a photo. The shutter has not fired doing that. So anytime you want to take a photo, you have to arm the shutter first, and then you can take a photo. So a bit wonky on that, because it's just, once you go through a couple rolls, you'll get it figured out. It's just building up that muscle memory of arm, photo, arm, and photo. And advance. I forgot the advance part. So arm, photo, advance. That's the process every time you want to take a photo. So let's talk. So we've seen the mechanics for this. To take an actual photo, the full process is going to be making sure that you're ready to take a photo, which we now are. So we're going to set the exact shutter speed that we want. We're going to call it 1/125th of a second. We're going to dial in our focus. We're going to dial in our aperture, and that's going to be based on either extrapolating your settings from the Sunny 16 rule, or using a light meter handheld or a light meter app on your smartphone. Those will work as well. And then dialing in your settings based on those readings. We're going to arm the shutter. Now we're going to look through the viewfinder in the back of the camera right here, and that's going to let us figure out what's in front of the camera that we're going to take a photo of. Once we're happy with the image composition, we take the photo, and then we advance. And that's the process for taking a photo with this. All right, cool. What about a double exposure? You cannot. This camera has built-in double exposure prevention, and I'll show you. So if we arm the shutter, take a photo, arm the shutter, we cannot take another photo until we advance the film. Then we can take another photo. So there is no way with this camera to take a double exposure shy of rewinding it and trying to get everything realigned. It's not something I recommend at all doing, because it's a really good way to just screw up your exposures. So if you're going to use this, just take it as it is. Don't try to get double exposures with it. So another thing is, at the end of the day, if you have this armed, that puts a lot of tension on the springs. These springs are all mechanical, so when you arm the shutter, you're putting tension on the springs. If you leave it like that, they can develop a memory. So you always want to trigger the shutter when you're done shooting for the day. All right, so let's talk about some tips for using the Halina 35X so you can get the most out of your camera. So I will say that this camera surprised me for the reputation that it has online, which was universally terrible. I found the images this camera delivered to be really sharp. They were very saturated. The colors came back very, very rich, and I just found them to be really full of image character. So either I have a stunningly good copy of this, perhaps the best one ever made, which I doubt, or the reputation online may not be completely earned. I will say that the lens on mine has a slight downward point to it, so you can't really notice it. It looks like it's properly aligned, but it actually aims a little bit like this, downward. That was a bit weird. But at any rate, that would be indicative not of a problem with the lens itself, but with construction and construction quality control. So, and also, like I've said, the build quality is stunning, and yeah. Your best results with this camera will come from C41 film, and the reason for that is because there's good exposure latitude with your C41, like that, and it will give you some very lovely and rich colors. The color saturation on this film will largely be lost, or on this camera, the saturation it gives you, will largely be lost if you're using black and white film. You can also get away with slide film if you have a very good light meter and trust this camera's shutter speed. So really, this is a very well-made camera for color work. And for metering, you can certainly use a handheld or meter app, and that's fine. If you don't happen to have one of those, you can use the Sunny 16 rule, which is in full sun at f16. Your shutter speed is the number closest to your film ISO. So if you're using Kodak Pro Image 100, let's say, and you're set at 100 for your 1/100th of a second for your shutter speed and f16 in full sun, that will give you a proper exposure. If you're in shade or cloud cover, it would be shaded 8. If you're inside, it would be indoor f2.8. This lens doesn't quite reach f2.8, so if you're using 100, you'd want to use a 50th of a second at f3.5. So And then you can trust the film to do the rest from there. And one other thing I would say is that because the interface on this camera is a bit fiddly and there are some extra steps that most cameras don't have, what you want to do is dry practice this camera's use without film a number of times just to get your muscle memory down for what buttons you've got to push in what order. And that's going to help you prevent accidental trigger firings without the shutter being armed and losing film. So just a good practice there to dry practice before you actually use it. Some things not to do with your Halina 35X. Don't store the camera with the shutter ready to fire. At the end of the day, always trigger the shutter just to prevent fatigue and wear on the springs. Don't leave your camera in your car because heat can cause the lubricating oils to break down or to get very thin and get into places they shouldn't, which can cause your shutter not to operate correctly. Also, cold in your car can cause the lubricating oils to break down and become even thicker and gummier than they already have been. Don't keep your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have very good desiccant packs, and rechargeable desiccant, not the kind that comes with the grocery store beef jerky or whatever, because moisture will permeate through that plastic and can cause fungus to grow on your lens or in the leather covering, and that's a bad situation. Don't let this get wet. It isn't weather sealed. The internal components are metal and they can rust, which will completely brick your camera. And just remember that your Halina 35X, despite its reputation, is a precision tool and should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thank you everyone for watching. If this video was helpful and useful to you, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know that I'm on the right track and that I'm producing and creating content which is helpful to you. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please leave those in the comments section below. I'm pretty good about responding every couple of days and answering whatever questions you have to the best of my ability. If you'd like to subscribe to find out when I have more videos about how to use cameras, photographic techniques, or the best practices for the tools of the trade, by all means please subscribe and check that notifications bell to be alerted when new content arrives. If you'd like to support the channel by joining with a membership, there are now membership options for this channel at different tiers that will give you different benefits if you would be interested in that. And one last thing, thank you everyone very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next videos. Won't we, Steinbeck? What's that look about?